purpose of this lesson is to learn about exceptions and exception handling techniques, how to catch and throw exceptions, how to use the tryparse method, how to create exception classes, how to use streams, and how to read and write to a text file. An exception is a condition where our program starts to function unexpectedly. And what this does is it will cause things called an unhandled exception termination error. Usually what we refer to this as a computer crash. These types of conditions, if allowed, can lead to security holes, and they get exploited frequently. So we need to make sure that we protect our program by protecting every section of code from unhandled exceptions. The exceptions belong to a class of objects, simply called exception, and it allows us to catch these errors and prevent them from causing harm. It is possible to deliberately cause an exception. We may want to purposely cause an exception to occur, and we want to gracefully handle it. What that means is we want to have a section of code that actually purposely generates an error, but we need something to handle that error to say, hey, you did something wrong, you need to fix it. Alright, but what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our code doesn't allow the program to crash. Legacy applications rely on a whole bunch of if-then statements to try to protect against unhandled exceptions and to validate data. And the way that this works is in older programs, you would have to put an if-then statement for every single time the user provides input. You'd have to put it into a loop. And if the data that they created wasn't valid, then we would have to ask them again. And the code got very unwieldy. Object-oriented programming languages actually have a much more elegant solution to it called try-catch blocks. A try-catch block is just simply a section of code where we put all of the code that we're supposed to try, or all the code that is supposed to run, into a section called try. And then we have another section called catch, which is if we get an error, what should the program do? And so the stuff that happens if we get an error goes in the catch segment. You can only have one try section for each try-catch block, but you can have multiple catch blocks. And the catch portion of it, what we do is we want to catch things like if you try to divide by 0, or if you tried to use a number in a text field, or if you try to use a text, like a string in a number field or something like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to catch whatever the actual error is. You can place as much code as you need in the try block, but only the first statement that actually generates an error will get caught. Everything after that in the try block actually gets ignored. So what happens is if we go through the try block and one of the lines generates an error, it immediately jumps down to the catch block that corresponds to whatever the error was. So we can have multiple catch blocks, but good programming design says we should only have 2 or 3 different things that we're trying to catch. Anything more than that is considered to be bad design. We also have this thing called a finally block. So they're actually try, catch, finally. And the finally block is the very last one. It's optional, and this is going to be if the program was successful. If that code ran, great, we still do the finally block. If the program failed and we ended up in the catch segment, so we had a problem, we still run the finally block. And what this is used for is to clean up connections to databases or files or anything else that we need, but we can only have one finally block. Sometimes we need to convert data from one data type to another. And so far we've used the convert_to method, so we did convert.toString and convert.toDouble. Well, what we can do is we can actually use what's called a tryparse method. And so what I can do is if I want to convert something to a double, I can do a double.tryparse. And what that means is that we're going to try to take whatever data was inputted, parse it, or convert it into a double type, or whatever the data type is that we need to convert it to. And if it's successful, it will actually perform the conversion for us. But let's say I try to take something like the word Bob, and I try to convert that to a double. That's not going to work. So if I were to do a convert.toDouble and then try to convert Bob, Bob is not something that looks like a number, so therefore it would actually throw an error and crash my whole program. Well, instead of doing a convert to, if I do the tryparse and I try to convert Bob, what it will do is it will try to convert it. If it's successful, it actually does the conversion. If not, it returns a value of 0. What this does is it significantly shortens the code that we need to be able to perform our conversion and check for errors at the same time. It is possible for us to create our own exceptions. So by default, we have exceptions for things like dividing by 0, not a number, anything like that, maybe like format exception or something, but we can create our own exceptions. And the way that we do it is we create a new class and then we tell it the name, and you notice here we have a colon and then exception. And if you think back to using objects, when we created an object, we could make a child or derived object from a parent object. We can do the exact same thing here. So we have a child exception called divide by 0, which is a type of exception. And then if this exception occurs, then this is the code that would actually run. Now, for us to use our own exceptions, we typically have to use what's called a throw command, and we actually have to throw an error so that way we can get into this type of section of code. When we throw an exception, we're essentially causing an exception to occur. So we're forcing the system, hey, we want to make sure an exception occurs here. But we only want to do that if we have a catch block that corresponds to it. What this does is it allows us to have greater control of our exceptions. We can customize our errors and we can make them more explanatory. What that means is if, let's say somebody were trying to type in a number and they type in -3 and it was supposed to be a positive number, well, we actually have the ability to tell the user, hey, please enter something greater than 0. It has to be a positive number. And what we can do is we can make errors and we can display messages accordingly. So we could do something like, hey, you tried to divide by 0, or your account balance is below 0, you can't have any more money. Or we could do something like we tried to create a new employee and their employee number contains characters when it's only supposed to have numbers in it. Storage is the place where we actually put our files or whatever we're working on. So this is going to be memory or our hard drive. Now, memory in the computer is considered to be temporary storage. It is volatile, which means if we lose power, all of the data that's stored in that memory is actually going to be lost. Permanent storage is something like your hard drive, a CD, a DVD, flash drive, or etc. And those are non-volatile. What that means is that if we lose the power, then the data does not get lost. So obviously, if we're working on a file and we want to save whatever text we were writing, we actually want to commit that to the hard drive. And so what we're going to do is we're going to store whatever we're writing in memory and whatever's on the screen, and we're going to commit that to a file on the hard drive. Now, we also use files on the hard drive to free up memory, because if I have a program that is using a large amount of memory, what we can do is we can swap things in and out of a file on the hard drive. So files are just simply contents of memory, so things that were in memory that are committed to the permanent storage, so to our hard drive or flash drive or whatever else. We typically use what's called a sequential file, and these are written in the order that they're stored in memory. So if I type out a long section of code or a long section of text in a text editor, I can actually write that text to the hard drive. Now what will happen though is the file itself can become fragmented. If that happens, the operating system is going to handle it for us. We don't have to worry about it. All we have to worry about is that we tell the operating system that we need a file, that we're going to give it a name, we're going to give it a path. So where do we actually put it on the hard drive? Is it going to be under C:\users or anywhere else? And then the system will actually handle writing it out to the hard drive for us and keeping track of where all of the little parts of that file are. We're going to use these things called streams. And a stream is like a channel between our input device, which is going to be the keyboard, mouse, and memory, and an output device like a file or a printer. We have these things called console in, console out. Now, console in is going to be things that I've typed in from the keyboard. They will get loaded into memory. So if I'm making a program that is a text editor, if the user is typing things in, everything that they typed is stored in memory. Now, it's stored there until we decide to take whatever is there and commit it to the hard drive. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Now, console.out, that's going to allow us to take things from a file and then produce output on the screen from it. And then there's also another one, which is console.error, which is what is going to allow the system to actually write errors to the screen if one occurs. Streams actually only allow, usually only allow flow in one direction. So what will happen is if I'm typing something in a text editor, I want to save it, I'm going to use something that will write whatever I've typed on the screen to a file. If I have a file on the hard drive and I want to open it up, I need something that will read the contents of the file and bring that into my program. So we're going to use what's called a stream reader, which will read text from a file, and then we're going to use a stream writer, which will allow me to take whatever I typed in my file, in my program, and commit it out to a file. And then we also do have a bidirectional file stream, and what that does is it allows us to keep track of whatever's on the screen and in the file, and it synchronizes the two of those. Typically, though, we're going to use the stream reader and stream writer. For this program, we're going to build one that is a text editor called TextPad. And so I'm going to rename this. And what TextPad is a program that will allow me to write text files and then also open up existing text files. So I can type text in it, and then after I type the text, then I can save it. If I have an existing text document, I can open it, edit it, save it, and it'll be something similar to what we're used to seeing for typical text editors. I'm going to increase the size of my form so I have extra room to work. And what we're used to seeing whenever we deal with a text editor is going to be just simply a text box. And now a text box, what we've played with so far, is nothing more than a single lined, it's just a box that allows you to type text in. Well, you actually have the ability to change this to be a multi-line text box. So I'm going to select multi-line here. And then the other thing that I want to do is I want to change a property for it, which is its doc property. And I'm going to select the middle here, which will fill the parent container, which the parent container is just simply the entire form. Some other things that I want to use are going to be the horizontal and the vertical scroll bars. So I need to turn those on. So I have scroll bars right now are set to none. I'm going to turn it on so we have both. Now the way that Windows works is it'll show both of them, but only if the text really does go across the screen and goes off the edge. Now the other thing that I want to do is I want to be able to wrap text, so you'll notice that word wrap is set to true. This will allow me to type, and as I'm typing, the text will automatically wrap to the next line. The next thing that I want to create is a menu strip. Now a menu strip is what we're used to seeing at the top of our programs, where we have our file menu and our help menu and so forth. Now our program is going to be a basic program. It's just simply going to allow us to open a file, save a file, close the file, exit, and then we'll also have a help menu that will tell about who made the program. So to make the menus, I just simply click where it says type here. I'm going to type file. And then what I'm used to seeing when I go into the file menu are things like open, then we have save, then we have save as, and then we have exit. These are typical basic text editor programs. Then I'm also going to make a help menu. And then under the help menu, I'm going to put about. Alright, so those are my menus. And if I run this, we will actually have the menu strip at the top of the screen. And we just have a basic shell of it. We don't actually have any functionality yet. But we have file, here are our menus, and then we have our help menu with about. Now what I'm used to seeing is when I press the Alt key on my keyboard, I'm used to it popping up to the menu, and I'm used to having a keyboard shortcut. So I'm used to being able to tap Alt and then press F to get to the file menu. To do that, I need to actually modify the name of the file menu just a little bit, and I'm going to put an ampersand before the F. And what that does, you'll notice we now get an underline. Alright, so I'm going to do the same thing with open. I'm going to put an ampersand. Save is going to be in front of the S. Now, I can't do the same thing for save as. I can't have two with the same letter, so typically we have it before the A for save as. And then in exit, usually it's the X. Okay, the help menu is typically the H. And then the about menu is typically the A at the beginning. Okay, so now what I just did is if I run this, my menu strip, you don't see the underlines right now, but as soon as I tap the Alt key, now I get the underlines. And if I tap F, because F is underlined, the file menu will show up. And then all of the ones that are underlined, if I press that particular key, I can get to that menu strip item now. So I wanted to exit the program, open, and so forth. These don't have any programming code yet, so it's not actually going to do anything yet. Before I can add any code, I need to start renaming some things. So the first thing is going to be our text box. I'm going to call this TBX body. And then our file menus, the way that these work is typically we're going to prefix them with MNU. And so what we typically will do is we'll have this one is the file tool. Actually, I didn't want that one. I want the open. And so I'm going to rename this to MNU, and then it's going to be file open. So I'm listing the name of the file or the menu that we're in, and then also which object it is. Alright, so this one's going to be MNU file save. This one is MNU file save as. This one is MNU file exit. This one is just MNU file. This one is MNU help. And this one's going to be MNU help about. So what this does is as we're typing in our code, it makes it real easy to identify which of those menus and in what order it's in and what the submenu is. So if I look at save as, it's MNU file, so it's in the file menu. It's called save as. And then even if I had something off here, because we can shoot off of the side of it, then I would make all of those whatever else after the save as. So that way we can know the exact order to get to it as we go down through the menu. Now the actual code for these is going to be just like if I were to make a button. So to make the code, I double click on it. And so I have to double click on each one. And then help and about. Now we don't have any code to run for help and file itself, so we don't want to make any click code there. We're only going to do it for the submenus. Alright, so let's start with the easy ones. We're going to start with the help menu, so help about. And notice we have an MNU help about underscore click, so if you click on that, what does it do? Alright, so I'm going to make a message box. And we're going to say something like this, program made by, and I'm going to use my escape sequence, Brian Pringle, and then we'll call the title about. Okay, so now what that does, when I go to help and about, a message box pops up, and this program made by Brian Pringle, about is the title. And so that's it for the help about menu. The other one that's going to be the easy one to code is going to be our exit. Now the exit button is going to be that I want to exit or close the entire form. And you need to remember that anytime we instantiate an object, it's always referred to as the this variable. Okay, so if I look at this, I don't have any objects that I'm playing with except for I have a form that is an object. So when this particular form loads, the this variable is referencing form 1. Alright, so what I want to do when you go to MNU file exit is I want to close form 1. Well, form 1 is referenced by the this variable, and so what I can do is I can close the this reference. Alright, so start the program, go to file, exit, and now it closed our program. This only works because this is referencing the form that we're currently on. So if I had another form that was open, I would only close that particular form. In this case, it's my only form, so I can close my program this way. Alright, I want to start working with my file open dialog. And the way that this works is I want to see our typical open file dialog that we're used to seeing on the screen, the one where we select a file and then click open and then we can open our files. And so what I need to do is I need to pull in some existing code from Windows. Well, this actually exists as part of Windows.Forms. So what I can do is I can just start typing that I want to open up a new open file dialog. Now the way that this works is this is an object that I have to instantiate. So I have to give it a name. My name is going to be source file, and I'm going to set this equal to a new open file dialog. Okay, so it just simply is going to create the open file dialog. And then what I need to do is I need to show it. So I'm going to say source file.show and show dialog. So we're going to show it on the screen. Now when I start this, if I go to file open, you'll see that I have a normal file open dialog, what I'm used to seeing. And it pops up, it just says file name, and it'll open any file that's here of any type. Well, what I can do is I can specify that I only want it to open certain types of files. So what we're used to seeing is a files of type over here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify somehow that I only want it to show text files. The way that I do that is before we actually show the dialog, we're going to set a filter. So for source file, we're going to have a dot filter. And then what we're going to do is in parentheses actually tell the user what we want them to display. So we're going to say text files. And then this is what the user will see as text files. Well, then what I do is a vertical pipe, which is the key above your enter key, and then I give it a mask, which is going to be asterisk.txt. And then that's it. So now what will happen is when I run this and I say file open, now what you get is text files, and it shows in parentheses here asterisk.txt. So it's simply showing you that that's the type of file that we're going to open. And the reason for it is when we go through our list of files here, we'll see that we don't have any .txt files, so we don't have anything to open. But if there were text files, that would be the only thing in the list that would actually show to us. Alright, so what I want to do is I need to somehow keep track of what file actually we select when this thing pops up. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable to hold the file name. Alright, so this is actually going to be a global variable, so I'm going to put it before my form loads. I'm going to say, and this is declare global variables. So I'm going to say string, and we're going to call this str source file. And so this is just simply going to keep track of the file name where the file was saved. And the reason that I do it as a global variable is after I open the file, I need to keep track of where that file was so that way I can save the file back to the same location later. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set str source file equal to the actual file name that came out of source file. So source file dot file name. Okay, so now what this will do is it will automatically set the source file to be whatever the file name was that we selected in the file name. Alright, so here's the catch is going to be that I need to somehow open up this file, whatever's in it, read all the contents of the file, and then put all of that into our actual text box. So whatever is in the file is going to be in the text box. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I need to read all the contents of the file in and put it into a text string that holds the contents of the file. So I'm going to make a new string variable called str file contents, and we're going to set that equal to, and we have the ability to read stuff in from the file. So we're going to say file dot. Okay, now the problem is that I don't have my file capabilities because I'm missing a using statement up here. So I need a using system.io, and what this will allow me to do is read from input-output devices like the hard drive. Okay, so now what I can say is string str file contents is equal to file dot, and then I want to read all the text, not all bytes, all text from that file. Well, what file am I reading it from? I'm reading it from str source file. Okay, so we're taking this str file contents, we're going to put all of the text that's in this str source file, whichever one we selected from the open file dialog, and we're going to put that into the body of our our text. So what I'm going to do, the next thing is tbx body.text is going to equal to str file contents. Okay, so go through this again. We show the dialog, we filter it out so you only see text files. Then what we do is whatever file you select, we read the file name, put that in str source file, which is a global variable to keep track of the name of the file. We read in all the contents of that file, put it into a string called str file contents, and then we put all of the str file contents into the text of our body. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to read in an existing text document and populate our tbx body.text variable or value, and then that will allow us to see the text that's in the file. Alright, so let's go ahead and try to run this and see if we can pull text in from a file. So file open, and I've created a dummy text here called lorem ipsum, and so you notice I select it, we get lorem ipsum.text, and the only reason the text file is showing up is because the filter says .text. So click open, and here is all of our text, so everything is in here. Alright, so now lorem ipsum is just simply dummy text. It's a little small, so I'm going to make my font size a little bit bigger. Alright, so under font, I can change the size here. Let's make this a 12-point font. Make it a little larger so you can see it. Okay, so lorem ipsum. There you go. Alright, so now you can see the text that is in here. You can see that we can scroll up and down, and it does actually word wrap. So what it's done is it's taken anything that was in that file, and it will display it to the screen for us. Alright, now there is a problem with our code, and I want to show you this. If I take my program and I go File Open, and then I cancel this, I will actually get an unhandled exception. And what that is you'll notice I get a system.argument exception. And what that means is that I left the path empty here. I didn't actually select a file. Well, if I didn't select a file, then it tries to keep going on through the code, and the next line of code after selecting a file is to read the string in, which means that str source file is null. There's no value for it. Therefore, when it tries to run this line of code, it fails. Alright, so I'm going to show you the first way that we would do error checking with this. The first way would be to make sure that str source file actually is not blank. We want it to actually have contents. Alright, so I'm going to show you the old-fashioned way of doing it, and then I will show you the object-oriented way of doing it. Alright, so the old-fashioned way to do it is to use an if statement. So I'm going to say if, and then if str source file is not equal to a blank value. Because when I created it, str source file is blank. Alright, so if str source file is still blank when we get to here, that means that we didn't select the file name. Alright, so I want it to run all this code in here if that's blank. Okay, now if it's not blank, so if it's not blank, that means that we selected something. But if it is blank, we don't need to do anything, we just simply return. Okay, so if it's not blank, we do this. If it is blank, we return. We just simply carry on our way like we were before. So I'm going to say File Open, cancel this, and now our program is still running. It didn't actually crash. Alright, now technically this is handling an exception, and the exception is that our code, we didn't select a file, so we're just simply telling it, we'll only run this section of code if you really did select a file name. Like I said, this is the old-fashioned way to do it. It's not quite as elaborate as some of the newer ways that we have to handle exceptions. Alright, so I'm going to put this back the way that it was. I'm going to get rid of our if statements. And there. So now it's back to the way it was, which means that if I run this, open, cancel, we crash the program again. Now it's back to its previous state. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to try to perform a section of code. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, I want to catch the error and do something with it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we need to figure out first how we got an error. Alright, so when I run this and I do File Open and I cancel it, you'll see that I get an argument exception. And so what I want to do is I want to try to catch this argument exception. I know this is the specific type. And typically what we want to test for is going to be 2 or 3 conditions. We usually want to try to test for the condition that we expect to happen the most. And then we also want to try to capture the generic exception class. And so I'll show you what I mean by that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of this code that is in our opening file dialog, and we're going to put it in a try block. Alright, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another block called catch, and then we're going to do this. Okay, so what am I catching? Alright, so what I have to do is I have to specify what kind of condition I'm going to catch. Alright, so for this particular one, we're going to catch argument exception, and you'll notice that shows up. And then what we have to do is we have to give it a name. And so I'm just simply going to give it a variable name to get stored in it called EX. Now you'll see a lot of text that says to use E, but I can't do that because E is our event arguments. Alright, so I'm just simply going to call it EX. And then what we're going to do is typically we want it to do something, like to let the user know that something went wrong, or that they did something that they shouldn't have, or how to fix the problem. Now for this particular one, we actually don't want it to do anything, so we just want it to return, but I want to show you how you could actually make it do something. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a message box that says you didn't select a file. So messagebox.show, and then we'll do something like you did not select a file. And then usually we'll do something like call it error. Okay, so now what we're doing is you'll notice that EX says it's declared but it's never used. It's okay. We just simply didn't use it down here. When I run this now, if I go to File, Open, and I cancel this, now it comes up and it says you did not select a file. So it's a more graceful way to handle that something happened that was wrong. Okay, so now here's the thing, is that why would I do this catching when I actually ended up with quite a few extra lines of code? And the reason for it is that I can also catch just a generic type of exception. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm also going to make another catch block, and this time it's going to be exception, just the generic exception. Once again I call it EX, and then now what we're going to do is we're going to do something more along the lines of do a message box and say, you know, you got an error. So we'll do messagebox.show, and inside of this we're going to say something like error, and then we'll use a placeholder for 0. And then what we can do is we can show what the actual error is. Now I called it EX for the exception, and so what I'm going to do is EX, and then I can do dots, and you'll notice we have a bunch of stuff in here, and what I can do is I can take the message and I can display it out by converting it to a string. And then now, what that does for me is makes it where we can actually display the message to the user. Now, when I actually cancel my dialog, I know that I'm going to throw an argument exception because that is what it told me the exception was. So it's going to go to here. But if there's something else that occurs that's wrong, we want to throw them into this catch down here for generic exception, and we always want to have our generic exception at the end here. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this, and let's scroll down so you can see the section here. Okay, so when I do this file open and I cancel it, it says you did not select a file. And the reason for it is I did an argument exception. That's the kind of exception that I caught. So it uses the first one of these catch blocks that it comes to, that matches the conditions. But if I were to stop this and delete our argument exception, so I'm just going to cut this so I can paste it back in a minute. If I do file open and I cancel it, now it just simply shows me the actual error. Now, empty path name is not legal. What that means is that I forgot to do my string.format. When I do a message box and I include something like this where I use a substitution, I have to do a string.format, and then this inside of here is going to be our actual message. So we're going to do string.format and then something like error. Okay, so now if I do this again, file open, cancel this, now it says error, empty path name not legal. So just simply what we're doing is we're saying this is the message, this is what the system is saying is wrong with it, and then it kind of gives the user an idea on what's wrong. Well, where did this come from? This came from the exception class. All of these exceptions are already declared, the system already understands them, and we can just simply use them to our benefit. Alright, so I'm going to go back in, and I'm going to paste my code back in here, and I want to have the system where it will say something like you didn't select a file, but what I actually don't want it to pop this up because I don't expect this behavior. What I expect it to do from my use of other text editors is if I go file open and I cancel it, I just expect it to do nothing, so we're just simply going to return. Alright, so let's try this, and if I go file open, cancel this, hey look, we're back to where we started. It didn't pop up anything on the screen because that's not the behavior that I expect to happen when I open up a text document and go to file open and click cancel. I expect it to just sit there and do nothing. But what happens now is if we get an argument exception, which means they didn't select a file, we do nothing. But if we actually really do get some sort of error, we're going to show them what the error message was. Now we have the benefit of being able to gracefully handle if they didn't select a file, but more elegantly handle if a real error did occur. Now I can add one more thing to this, which is going to be my finally block. And finally block says no matter if we were successful or not successful, we're still going to do something. So I'm going to do a message box dot show. This is the finally block. Okay, so now what this will do is whether or not it's successful or not, it goes into finally. So I'm going to go to file open. If I cancel, it should return, which means it doesn't do anything, but it will still do the finally block. So now we got into the finally block. Okay, but if it's successful, so if I open up my text document, it'll open the text document and still run the finally block because the finally block runs whether or not the code was successful or not. Alright, so why do we need the finally block? Usually in our code we'll do something like opening a connection to a database, or if we have this file open, we're just simply doing a stream reader here, but if we were to do a file stream, it would actually create a connection to that file, and if that file connection gets severed, we need our program to gracefully close the file or reopen the file or something like that, and the finally block is the one that can do that for us. Alright, so do I really expect a finally block if I have a text file? No, I don't, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. Now the next section of code that I actually want to make is the save as block, and the reason for it is the save block is going to use the save as in just a minute. I'll show you what I mean. Alright, so just like I did before, I need a variable to hold the location of the file. So we're going to do the same kind of thing that we did before. We're going to keep track of the file location. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make a string value called str file location. And then what I want to do is I want to save whatever the contents of my block are to a new file. And so what I need to do is I need to bring up the save file dialog. Alright, so when I bring up the save file dialog, the same thing, I have to give it a name because I'm instantiating it. This time I'm going to call it dest file for destination file, and that's equal to a new save file dialog. Alright, so what I need to do is the same thing that I did before. I'm going to filter this. So I'm going to say dest file dot filter is equal to text files, and then give it an actual filter to use, so asterisk.txt, and then I need to show the dialog, so we're going to do dest file dot show dialog. Okay, so that just simply brings up the save file dialog and then filters it out to show only text files. So if I go file save as, we bring up the save as dialog, and then you'll notice here we have save as type as text files because that's what it's actually going to allow us to use. Now I just clicked cancel and it didn't throw an error because I don't have any code that's relying on the name of that file yet. But I'm going to start adding some code that will. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to set this string variable up here. Actually, I'm going to move this. Okay, so I'm going to do a new string str file location, and we're going to set that equal to whatever the file name was that came out of destfile. So destfile.filename. Alright, so then what we're going to do is we're going to take whatever file name we select, and we want to write all the text that is in our text box out to that file. Alright, so what I need to do is I need a string variable to hold all the text that's in the text box. So I'm going to call this str text to write, and I'm going to set that equal to whatever's in tbxbody.text. So we're going to take all the contents of the tbxbody.text value, put that into str text to write, and then we need to write that out to a file. Well, once again, we can use our file dot, and now I have the ability to write all text. We used the read all text before, now we need to write all the text. Alright, so now if you notice here it says file.writeAllText, and it has some parameters that it expects. So it expects the path of where it's going to save, and then the contents of what to save. Alright, well, we have the path. The path is here is str file location, and then we have the contents of what to save is going to be str text to write. So what I expect to do is I expect to say str file location, and then str, we called it text to write, and then do this. But the thing is what the system's going to do is for a location like this, a path, we have to precede it with the @ sign. So we're telling it, take all this text stored in this file location, which is at some location, and then this is the text that we're actually going to write out. Alright, so then one more thing is what I expect to happen is when I take whatever's currently on the screen and I save it, then I expect the system to keep track of where I just saved it. And the way that I have that I can save this is I have a global variable up here called str source file, and I'm going to set this equal to whatever I just selected in my str file location down here. So I'm going to set str source file equal to str file location. So what this will do is it'll keep track of now the new location is whatever we selected from that text box. Alright, so like I did before, if I run this, if I do file, save as, and we can give it a name, but if I cancel this, we end up with the exact same argument exception that we had before. So what I need to do with this is I need to put this inside of a try block, just like I did the other section. So I'm going to say try, and then here I'm going to put curly brackets. So we're going to try all of this code and see if it works. If it doesn't, we need to catch it. Well, what are we catching? We're catching an argument exception. We're going to call it EX, which we're not actually going to do anything with because just like the one before, we're just simply going to return. But if we catch an actual exception, called EX, then we're going to do something else. And I'm going to cheat, and I'm just simply going to copy my message box up here, because this is just our generic, we're catching the error message, and we're going to display it out to the screen. Okay, so now what this does for me is if I go File, Save As, just like before, if I cancel this, we don't crash, we now just simply return back to what we were doing before because our argument exception was caught, and it just simply says to return back to what we were doing before. Alright, so I'm going to run it. This is my text. And I'm going to do File, Save As, and I want to save this out to this is my file, .txt. Actually, I'm not even going to do the .txt because the system will automatically add it for me because it's listed right there. So I'm going to save this. And then what I expect to happen now is if I go File, Save As, you'll see I have this is my file here. But the system will automatically keep track of where my file is. Alright, so I need to do the code for our save button. Now the save button is going to be a little bit different. what I expect to happen in a text editor is when I first make a document and I go File, Save, I expect it to act like I went to File, Save As. But if I open up an existing file and I go File, Save, I don't expect it to ask me where to save it. I just expect it to save it to the prior location. So what I need to do is I need to tell the system that if the file location is not empty, so up here at the top, remember we store the name of the location where we save the file. If this is empty or null, then that means that the file has never been saved before, and we should act like a save as. If this is not empty, it means that we have saved it before and that we should just save back to the same location. So this is going to be our key to figuring out if we've actually saved this document before or not. Okay, so we're going to make an if statement. So we're going to say if str source file is not equal to null. All right, now what this means is that it's not empty. Now it could also be, I may have to set it equal to 2 double quotes. We'll see which way it takes it here in a second. But what we're going to do is we're going to say that as long as that file name is not null, then we want it to write out the contents of this file. So what we're doing is we're telling it that if it's not null, we already know where to save the file because the str source file has a contents, and then we're just simply going to take whatever's on the screen and write it out. So just like we did before, we're going to make a string. We'll call str text to write. And remember, these variables only exist in the scope of this method. So this str text to write is different than the str text to write down here. And we're going to set this equal to whatever's in the tbxbody.text. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to write this out to the file. So we're going to file write all text. And where are we writing this? Same thing as before. We're going to write it out to str source file, because source file is our global variable. And what are we writing out? We're writing out str text to write. Okay, so if this file name is not blank, then we're going to read all the contents of the text box, put it into this string, and then we're going to write that string out to the source file path location. However, if it's not blank, then what I want to do, if it is blank, that means we've never saved it before, then I want it to act like I clicked on the Save As dialog. Okay, so what I want it to do is I want it to pretend that I clicked this one. So to do that, what I do is mnu and then File, Save As, dot. And then we have some methods that we can perform on it, one of which is to perform click. So I want it to pretend that I clicked on it. So if I go File and then I do Save, it'll automatically try to save it. Alright, so if I've saved it before, it'll actually save it out to the location. If I haven't saved it before, it'll pretend that I clicked on Save As. Alright, so this whole section of code here, just like everything else, needs to be in a try-catch block. So I'm going to say try, and then down here we're going to make a catch block. Okay, now in this case, we don't expect to have any errors out of this one, so what we're going to do is just simply catch the generic exception class. And then once again, I'm going to use my message box here, just because I already have it created, and that's all we're going to do is just simply show the error to the user. But I expect this to work just fine. I don't expect the user to click cancel or anything like that. So I expect it to work, but if something goes wrong, we're going to show to the user what the actual exception is. Alright, so I'm going to go to Start, and I'm going to say this is my new file. Now I've never done anything with this file before. It's never been saved. And what happens now is if I go to File, Save, it acts like I clicked Save As. Alright, if I go to File, Save As, it acts like Save As. Both of those do exactly the same thing. And the whole purpose of this is that I've never saved this file before, so therefore when I go to File, Save or File, Save As, they should both have the same outcome. Alright, so I'm going to save it, and I'll call it another file. And then now if I go and I type some more text in it, So here's some more text, and I go to File, Save. It didn't ask me where to save it this time. But if I go, and let's go ahead and open our lorem ipsum, just so we can see that we have a different file, and I go back and I open up our another file, here's my more text. So once I finally opened a file, when I go to File, Save, it's not going to ask me where to save it. It'll just automatically save it to the same location. But if I go to File, Save As, then I can save it as a new file. So this is new file number 2. Okay, so now if I go File, Open, here's new file number 2. Okay, now when I open this file, when I open the file up, this file was actually another file. Now when I've modified it, because I went to File, Save As, it knows that it should put all the stuff into file number 2. Alright, so I'm going to say another line. I'm going to just simply go File, Save. Oh, empty path is not legal. Okay, so what that means is that when I did my Save As, for some reason it did not save the path. But what's nice about that is that it actually does give us an error and show us that we had a problem. The last thing I want to show you is how to use the tryparse method. So I'm going to close this solution and make a new console application, and we'll call this tryparse. And then what I want to do is I want to show you how the tryparse method works versus the convert to. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the user to input a number, and then we're going to try to convert whatever they typed into a number. So I'm going to say console dot write, and then we're going to write out enter a number. And then we're going to put that number into a variable. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say str number. This is actually a string, so str number is going to be equal to whatever we read in from the console, so read line. So I'm not converting it here, I'm making a separate strings. And then what I want to do is I'm going to make a new variable to hold that number as a double. Alright, so I'm going to make a new double value called dbl number. And then what I want to do with that is I want to set dbl number equal to whatever that str number is converted as a double. So I'm going to say double dot and then tryparse. And then what am I going to try to parse as a double? So I'm going to take str number. So we're taking the string number, and I want to try to put it into dbl number. Okay, and then what I want to do is we're going to do console dot write line. Your number is, and then we'll do the placeholder for 0, and then we're going to convert or to show dbl number. Okay, so just a real basic program. Let's see, convert string, and it's saying that we're getting an overloaded method here. So what we're doing is we're trying to pass str number and to come back as dbl number. The reason that we're getting this kind of error is that we actually need a keyword here called out, and what that means is that it will take whatever is coming out of this tryparse method and put it into our dbl number variable up here. So now when I run this, if I type in the number 3, it'll come up and say your number is 3. I need my console.read at the end so we can wait for us to press enter. Alright, so I'm going to type in 3. It says your number is 3. Run it again. I type in 36.2. Your number is 36.2. Now, the thing that's different with this is going to be before, if I did a convert to, and I type something like Bob in here, or let's say I type in the number 3 as a word. Okay, when I did a convert to, it would actually crash my whole program. As a tryparse, it will try to convert it. If it works, great, it'll actually do the conversion. If not, it will show the output as being the number 0. So if the number that comes out of it is 0, then I know that this was not successful. And so a tryparse is a little nicer of a way to try to figure out if we can convert from a string to a number or from one type to another without crashing the whole program. If I were to do this as if-then statements, or if I were to do this as try-catch blocks, I would have to type quite a few lines of code to make it try-catch blocks or if-then statements, whereas my try-parse, it just immediately works like this. So what I could do is I could make an if-then statement that would actually try to figure out if this was successful or not. Alright, so my if statement is going to look like this. So I'm going to say if double dot tryparse, and then what am I trying to parse? Well, I'm trying to parse str number. Then we're going to perform this section of code, this conversion to a double. And then if this doesn't work, then we're going to do else something like console.writeLine, which actually, let's change the order here. We'll move this up here, put this in curly brackets, so that way it converts it and it says what the output is. But we're going to do a console.writeLine. You need to enter a number. And if I do this, then what it's going to do is we're going to try to parse this number. And so out dbl number. If it's able to convert it, great. If it's not, then we're going to tell the user, hey, you did something wrong and you need to fix your code. Not the code, but the input. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And if I type the number 3, great. If I type 3, you need to enter a number. So what it's doing is it will act as if it were a true-false statement. So if it's successful, we get our actual conversion here, but we also can use this thing like a Boolean. So we're trying to see if this is true. Alright, so I could do it the other way around. I could say if not while I'm running. Okay, I could do something like if not tryparse, then we're going to run this section of code. So I could turn this around. And then okay, so what I can do here is I can tell it that if it wasn't able to try the parse, you need to enter a number. Otherwise, we'll actually do the conversion. And so same thing as before. Run it, type a number, we get 3. If I type the word 3, you need to enter a number. So it works the same way, but what it allows me to do is I can see if it was able to do it or not. And if it wasn't able to do it, then we can perform a section of code based on it, because our if statement says if that's true, which this wasn't able to parse, then we can do this section of code. In this lesson, you learned about exceptions and the exception handling techniques, how to catch and throw exceptions, how to use the try-parse method, how to create an exception class, how to use streams, and how to read and write to a text file.